Well, like how you came and like why you, like how you learned to read. You know,
When
like
we,
I need to know that.
you
That's
could ask anybody that as far as
well,
that goes, you
but
know.
like how did you? I mean, like, cause you had to like. Well, let me. How did
What it was
like?
like in those days?
Yeah. Well, okay. Like, give me some background. Like, what was going on at that time that you had to come over and stuff? Like, how
Okay.
old? Because I'm not real sure about any of that stuff.
Oh, well, I should really let you read them. So I can trace it all back to my. Originally, we're really German,
Mm-hmm.
but we grew up in the Ukraine up till 6 years old. A bunch of Germans from Poland over here. Russia made it so good for them to own land. They needed more people to live there, so a bunch of Germans came from uh, the Poland area, like great grandpa, you know, and they settled in. The government even let them have the land real cheap, just like homesteading in Nebraska. People from Iowa, like Grandpa Sundermann, went
Mm-hmm.
there to homestead and they got the land very cheap, but they had to plant 5 acres of cottonwood trees. Are you already
Yeah.
Are you already? Is it already working?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Oh,
fun. Yeah.
okay. Well, anyway, that's just like us. Now here they made it. So they lived in Ukraine, and my dad did, and I mean his folks moved there, and my dad, and he met his wife. Her name was Martha, and they settled there and had a farm and raised children, had 5 kids. When the revolution started and there was no place to raise a family, and the Bolsheviks took over, they didn't want to live there anymore because already my grandfather and uncle had come here. My uncle came first in 1908, and he was just 18 years old, left everybody behind. They came, and then he sent for his parents and his uncle and aunt, and my parents didn't want to come yet because my dad was a wealthy farmer, so he stayed a while. But my brother, when he went to school, now religion was banned, so he'd come home from school and he'd sing. He learned this in school, and my folks were very devout Lutherans.
Mm-hmm.
And my little brother, he was older than me, came home and said, "Oh, there is no God, there is no God." And my parents just couldn't take that. They thought it's time to leave, where there's more religious freedom
Mm.
and everything else. And because by now everything was taken from them. So anyway, they came to, we're going to come to America. So we loaded up and got ready for the big day to arrive to
How old
come.
were you again?
And I was 6 years old.
Six. That's what I thought.
I was 6 years old. Hadn't started school there. My brother did. They took him older there, and went all the way across from the Ukraine, crossed all of the Germany, Czechoslovakia, and went to France. And there they found out that the quota was filled. They can't come,
Mm.
but they could go to Canada or Mexico. And here we were, you know, away from, had said goodbye to all the relatives, and my dad and his sister and family, 2 families traveled together. So they decided, instead of going to Canada, my dad said it's too cold there. They went to decided to go to Mexico by way of, they went between Cuba and in the Gulf of Mexico to Veracruz, Mexico. And I remember in my little childhood mind, Cuba. It was Cuba. And
No.
I remember, oh, we're in Cuba. And the natives there were by this big ship we had docked, and they sent up fruit, bananas, and stuff that grow down there. My dad bought a bunch, you know, for us to eat. And so then it took another while to go through the Gulf of Mexico. And then we landed in Veracruz. And from there we went to Durango on a ranch. And my dad worked for the government. I just read it recently. Rodriguez was his name. And we lived in a kind of a outside village and lived out in the country, kind of a, what did they call those houses? They were square with a courtyard in the middle and a doorway open from each one, and there's where they put us up. And we loved it there. We were there 2 years. And we learned the Spanish language among the kids. Fluently we could talk, just jabbered it away, but we didn't go to school because it was too far to walk, and we knew we weren't going to stay there anyway. But we learned the Mexican language, or should I say Spanish. And then, but we had lived there 2 years.
So you're like 8 years old now?
I was 8 years old. And then my grandpa sent money to my dad, and we went by train from Durango to El Paso, and I remember that. And then we went to, from there we went to, and my other cousins had to stay another 2 years. I don't know what because they didn't have anybody to sponsor them here like I did have grandparents. So my folks sponsored them when they came 2 years later. Betchers is their name. They had 5 kids. They were stopped in Denver, Colorado, and I think there was kind of a layover there in a train. And my dad thought he was going to go downtown or to a grocery store and pick up some lunch meat and stuff, and he got lost. My mother sat in the terminal with her 5 children. One was a baby, 1-year-old Paul was. My dad went to get stuff, and he didn't come back. It was almost evening. He got lost, and he couldn't speak English. And he had no way to, and he finally did. Someone he must have found. He was just, my mother sat there with her 5 children. We were hungry. He probably had the money in his billfold, you know. So, but he came back with bread and stuff, but he was lost, and he was very, very frustrated looking.
So you guys actually spoke what language?
Spanish.
You just like fluent. That was
German.
the language that you spoke.
While we lived in Mexico.
While you lived in Mexico.
Yeah, as kids, more so than my mother, because she didn't get out. But we could, all of us kids, we could speak Spanish pretty darn good.
Wow.
Well, and then of course, like I said, then from there we went to Humphrey, Nebraska. My grandpa lived there, and they came to Columbus to meet us, and there we were. And then finally we got out on a farm. Then we were still speaking. We finally got pretty much away from the Spanish and talked German a lot at home, and we really couldn't speak English yet. And we had a new land, a new school, and knew everything to learn. Really adjust to a lot of new things, you know. But we did well. Kids can adjust pretty well. And we lived on a farm then. People were very nice, and my dad worked as a hired man. And then we went to school there, and we were lucky enough to get to a church school that's like a church owning that school. It was a very much of a Lutheran community, and they had their own school. And we went to school there then, and
were you still like 8 years old at this time?
No, 8 or 9.
Like
I turned 9, yeah. And our teacher was a man teacher. He had 60 kids in this one-room schoolhouse, but the schoolhouse had 2 rooms. One was always used for confirmation class, and then the other one. And he had 60 kids, and he handled it all. And then us 3 Schroeters, he took us separately, and he put our lessons on the board, and we'd copy it and all that. And we didn't only have to do that. We had to learn religion. We had to learn all the commandments and everything. And we did. And it didn't take, I bet in 3 weeks we could speak English.
Really?
With our friends in school. They accepted us. You just, you
Really?
know. And we got home, we talked English right away, and German to our parents.
Wow.
And anything we went to tell our mother, we'd say it in German, but she soon learned English too, but not very good. It was real hard for her. She missed her homeland. She missed the friends she left behind. She missed a lot of things, you know, and she really never could talk fluently English because she just didn't have no chance. She had babies. She had 5 more children after she got here. So we got to this parochial school, and we had learned a lot of things, just a lot more than kids do now. We didn't have band we didn't have sports. We just put it all in art and music. We were taught music, you know, and science, everything he taught us, you know. We just and caught on really good, you know, and went to school in a horse and a buggy. We had our own. There was a barn by school. All the kids came. Like they didn't have rides. And on really bad days, my dad didn't even have a car. And finally, then we moved into town. That's what. When we moved into town, that's where we could be in town, and it was a different school again then. And my dad, as a hired man, worked out for a farmer, picked corn and stuff. And then we got older, and we were in 4-H. Had our own calves. We'd exhibit them at the fairs. And Walther League, it's for young people.
Mhm.
Church, we did a lot of things, went and gave plays and stuff, and they had the fair. We'd put on plays there in Chautauqua, they called it. And I don't know, the kids just were taught to learn more and memorize.
Mhm.
Nobody memorizes anymore. We memorized a lot of things, even not only in the catechism, but also like Longfellow, like Hiawatha. You know that story? Maybe you don't even know that.
I don't
About
actually.
Hiawatha by the wigwam and the bright blue waters and all that. And, well, anyhow, like I said, we grew up and drought, the depression came in. And it was hard for my folks. I think they worried about because things didn't grow. Corn got only about 3 feet
Yeah.
tall that one year. Grasshoppers came in swarms and darkened the sky.
Yeah.
And ate the corn, and one year they didn't have much, but my folks always we had cows and we had pigs to butcher, we had eggs. Mom made her own butter, and we were always happy. We didn't have the latest things, but we always were happy and had fun. The neighbor kids loved to come over and go sledding, and we had a pond out in the pasture. We'd go skating in the winter time, come in our house for popcorn and hot chocolate, and my folks were real good about having everybody in. And
So you started school like when you were when you were in Nebraska there,
yeah. Mhm.
and so that was like when you were what, like
Yeah,
9-ish,
uh-huh.
10-ish.
And
So like how many years did you go to school for then?
well, then we went to that Proctor school for 8 years,
For 8 years.
and then into Madison, there high school for 4.
So they've got like kindergarten, first, second, third.
They didn't have kindergarten.
So like, what grades did they have? Like, or
All
were there
grades.
grades? It was just
Well,
like
no, it was all grades, first, second, third, all grades.
yeah.
All grades. The last year, you had to go to confirmation class every day. In this other room that the schoolhouse had, the minister would come over, and we'd have confirmation every day, and had to learn a lot of passages and a lot of hymn verses and everything. And I guess maybe out of 10 children, we all stayed Lutheran. None of them married Catholics. They like, they just like the way we, people can tell the way you live. Not I'm saying that I'm perfect,
Mhm.
because my brothers were ornery. But like I say, they all married. My 2 brothers married Methodist. They both turned Lutheran. Ray married a Catholic. She's Lutheran. Dorothy was a Methodist. She wasn't even baptized, and she got baptized when the time she got married to my brother.
Mhm.
Like I say, out of 10 kids, nobody left the church. They all were there. I thought I was thinking about that the other day, I guess, and everybody found good mates. They all turned Lutheran.
Mhm.
And from then on, we found mates till we got married. And I moved when I was 21, I was married. Came to Iowa. Didn't know anybody here.
So how'd you meet Grandpa? I'm kind of curious.
Neighbor.
Really?
My dad, they were neighbors. We were neighbors, and he picked me up for choir and took me home from choir. Probably that's where we fell in love.
Really?
And sang in the choir. He had a wonderful tenor voice. He sang at some of our weddings, my sister's wedding. He sang the Lord's Prayer. He sang for funerals when we came to Carroll here.
So why'd you guys come to Iowa?
Okay. Now this is going to be on his side of the family. They lost their farm, by the way. They had practically had it paid for, but there were 80 acres over here that they thought they should buy. Then they would have had 4 80s. 4 80s makes how many acres? Be 200. 4 80s. That'd be one 80 for each child. They had 4
Yeah.
kids.
Yeah.
Okay, they all sat down. We can make it. Prices were bad. The depression was on. Hogs were only like 5 cents up.
Yeah.
That type, and so they said, well, even if they go down to 5 cents, we can still make payments because they had their farm paid for. So that's what they did. But you know what happened? Hogs kept going down lower than 5 cents a pound, and they could not make their payments. and it was really hard on them to. And they had mortgaged their farm, if you know what a mortgage is.
Mm-hmm.
You mortgage their farm so they can get that loan,
Mm-hmm.
and they couldn't make payments. And the bank did everything in their power so they wouldn't lose it. Made them all kind of options. And by that time, their mother died, which was a hardship for them. She was sick with cancer for quite a while, and let's see. So they decided, and Arno, he said, I'm done. Clear me of everything, I'm done. That was the youngest one. And he went to North Platte. He had a cousin there in the electric motor business. And he worked for Johnny Knapp. His wife was Arno's and Dad's cousins. So he worked there, and then he met a girl there, nice girl, Frida was her name. She's died a year ago here at Christmas time. And he asked her, and they were married. They met in the choir. They met at choir. Arno played the organ, wonderful. He went to Seward, to college there, and learned music. So then he decided, so Dad stayed out there because his folks, his dad, they stayed on a farm. They never moved into town. So they kept going, and then they decided, they got sick of it. Arno didn't have a job by then. Johnny laid him off, and they decided, well, he knew everything about electricity. So Dad says, well, I'm done. They had to take care of their dad now. Their father was living it, and he was only about in the 60s. And so they had a farm sale, and this is what they decided, that they had left enough money out of the farm. They lost the farm, remember? And a doctor came and bought it for $64 an acre, mind you. $64 an acre.
Wow.
And they could have made up, they could have taken out that loan, but they were so sick of all that. And Arno wanted to be in the electric motor business, and Dad said, I'll learn. So this is what they did. So Dad jumps in a car one day. I already had known him, and he kind of was hot after me. I knew that. I played around with other guys too. And then Arno had Frida, and they were going to get married. Well, he went back here and he married her, and they came directly to Carroll, Iowa. Dad already found Carroll. He picked it out of a map.
Oh, really?
He looked. He said he went all over. He went to Jefferson. He went down to Clinton. We even went to the very first trip was to Loveland, Colorado,
Oh, really?
and they loved it there. And Arno liked the West. Frida liked the West. See, she was in western Nebraska, by the way, North Platte.
Mm-hmm.
Is where Arno was working, and she taught school there. She was a country school teacher, all in one room, Well, so Dad, he thought, okay, at first him and Arno went Colorado, Alamosa, and all around in there they went. It's too cold there. It was so cold that night, but froze. It was in this early spring. So, okay, Loveland didn't look too good for motor business. Wasn't too much things motorized. Maybe you don't even want to know about this kind of stuff.
No, I this is interesting.
Okay.
I don't even.
Okay.
This is interesting.
Okay,
Actually.
so Dad knew nothing about motors, but Arno did. Arno was always figuring things out, and doing. So he went to work for Johnny, so he even learned more.
Mm-hmm.
So they decided. So one day Dad thought, well, he'll get in the car, and he looked in the map, and he thought, here is Carroll, Iowa, and all these little towns around: Maple River, Templeton, Helber, Dedham, Willie, Glidden, and it was a lot of farming, and needed that had motors. It was driven like milking machines, and those motors do need repair. Mm-hmm. So just like I was going to say this, if you believe in God, the Lord just picked this place for us. He wanted us here, so. He thought, he stopped in Carroll, went through Arcadian, and here he went straight to where he went to was, I think, the Chamber of Commerce. And then he went to see the Lutheran minister and got acquainted with them. Nice church here, and that all helped a lot. And so they said, do you have anybody that fixes motors in this town? Yeah, we have a guy, if you tend to his business. Why, he'd have a heck of a lot of business, but he's drunk all the time. Laid drunk. People bring the stuff in, and it was under the City Club. The City Club was an entertainment place here in town. You could dance up there, and had people like Lawrence Welk come, played, it was real famous.
Sure.
And down the basement was this drunkard's guy who was laying drunk. But and another guy had a office there, and the boys learned to know him really well, and were good friends with him. And I don't know whether they're still living. And so anyway, he talked to this, Sears was his last name, Sears. Well, and it got to the point where he said something about selling out, and yeah, he'd sell this that blah 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 word if he could, and boys were interested. So he went back and he talked to Shorty. They called Arnold. It was Shorty and Bill all the time. The business name was Shorty and Bill. Everybody called him Bill, but me, because one time our minister in church said, "Oh, who's this Wilbert?" Well, I didn't know his name was Bill, like that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I called him Wilbert because his mother did, so I never did much. Well, anyway, so they got together, got their heads together, and they bought him out. Shorty says, "I don't have any money. I've got the experience." And from the sale, they had farm sale then. The money they got off of that farm sale, the machinery and cows and what was left, wasn't a great lot because, like I said, times were bad. They had a beautiful parlor organ, which I wished I would have insisted on that we buy it. Sold for $10. That they all learned to play on. Dad could play Grandpa
Wow.
could play the organ.
Really?
He played in church a number of times,
Wow.
but never carried it through, and his dad did too. But anyhow, this nice parlor organ, I remembered in their house. Their mother kind of taught them the notes, and this is what they did. They didn't have TV, so they would sit in the evenings and play that organ, pump,
Wow.
a beautiful ornate, and I still think of it. And this lady, but by that time they were so discouraged. All they wanted to do was get out of everything and get out of here. So this is what they did. Arno and Frida got married then. Dad came with them. And they rented an apartment upstairs by a doctor. Chiropractor lived on the bottom, and they bought this guy out, and they started in. In September, he came and got me, and we got married out there. A nice little wedding, not like they have now.
Right.
And Arno didn't even have enough money to buy his bride a ring. Dad had to borrow it. Grandpa had to borrow it to him, so he could buy Frida a ring. Weddings were, a lot of people got married, my brother and wife just went to the parsonage and tied the knot. And I babysat a lot. I was kind of like a nanny. That's how I spent my time. Because girls didn't really go working a whole lot. Some didn't, of courthouse. Took care, like the preachers, when they had a baby, I went over there and I was, like I say, I was their nanny. And he was also the preacher that married us and we got married, and that very same night we went off on a little bit of a honeymoon up to Minnesota and stuff. It was wonderful weather. It was in end of September. Came down here and lived with Arno and Frida. They already had an apartment. Grandpa was living with them. And I came and we lived with them a week. We found an apartment on the south side. Katie, an old maid, owned that house. She lived downstairs and we lived upstairs. And it was just there again, was meant to be. I was never lonely because she was there always. She'd many times invited us down for supper. And the guys went to work every day and they were happy. They always had business. And then and Arno had their baby first in March, and Ron was born in August, a month before our wedding date, before our anniversary, first anniversary. So everybody had their children right away. It seemed like, they didn't have these birth control pills like they have now.
Right.
We had babies, and and that was fun. We'd have wheeler babies to town in a buggy, which I'd stop in the shop. The shop was we lived on the south side. Dad was so proud. This is mine, all mine, So through, we joined in church. We sang in a choir, and we belonged to a fellowship, a couples club, and
Was that the shop that's right next to that service station there now?
no.
No,
This was the third
it's
place.
A different one.
The first place was under the city club on, where was it? What's there now? I think it's something like where the library is. I think around there. And then the second time was on 3rd Street on the corner there. There's a second-hand store there now. Was it on Main Street? Coming down Main Street and then 3rd Street. There. It's right in the corner was their shop. That was really handy, because we lived what was across the street. But anyhow, on that corner.
Yeah.
And we lived on the south side, 114 South Clark. And when I'd walk to town, we'd walk all the time. We'd wheeler. Nice day. All the mothers were coming from every direction on their little baby buggies.
Yeah.
And I'd stop in the shop and say hi, and Grandpa would have to come look at Ronnie, and be so proud. And we've had customers, he'd take time out, he said, this is mine, all mine, you know, he was so proud. Well, after that, they had to move, they had to give up, that was renting. Then they thought, okay, we're not going to be moving all our life.
Sure.
We're going to, so they bought this place down here on the highway.
Right, which is...
Yeah, which is it, and it was some property with it. The house that is there right now, let's see, is that house still there? Yeah, because Ruby, yeah, I know who lives in it. And my friend Ruby, her mother, both her parents have died, and she, of course, she inherited. She was an only child. In that, and then right next to the shop is a parking lot now. The post office bought that, and then back, where the post office is parked, if they would have hung up on it, would have gotten a lot more money. But there was a kind of a recession. Things were getting kind of bad again, and they didn't want no more business of having, they had some debt left. They thought if they'd sell all that, they'd clear themselves and wouldn't have to worry about losing anything, because that's all they could think about is losing. They lost things once.
No kidding.
So they sold it all and got themselves debt free, but they kept the house. And then after a while they sold the house too. So then they got themselves cornered in there pretty much small. They hardly had a place for a parking lot. Post office comes and buys all these houses, and they cemented everything out, but they could use all this parking for their customers. Post office said, you can use it, but we have to buy it. So that's what they did. Another guy that they fixed it up so nice now. And
that building that it's like that building that you're talking about now, which is right next to that service station there.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know it still says Sundermann on the side?
Yeah,
you can still read it.
You can read it.
Dad pointed that out to me this summer one time.
I think you can. They did add some boards on there to hide that. Your dad painted that one time. He painted.
Really?
Yeah, it was fading out, and he painted it really, and it followed those lines, and he painted it nice.
Yeah, it's still, you can, if you look at it, you can read Sundermann through the falling off paint and stuff. We were sitting in that parking lot one time. I was getting my car fixed, and he said, look up there, and I looked, and it says Sundermann, and it was really cool.
It must really bring a lot of memories back to your dad, because when he was a little guy, he got to be 4 or 5 years old. I would let him walk to the shop, for something to do, because he couldn't, no preschool any place.
Sure.
And kids really got restless. So he had his little toolbox with a handle up here, and he'd go and Grandpa would give him a little job, like sorting bolts and stuff.
Sure.
And he grew up like that. He many times went and sorted bolts, and he just grew into that. And after a while, he swept floors, whatever they could use them, and then he got a job there. All through high school, not through all through high school. He worked for a shoes place once here, but he liked it there. I think he liked it. I don't know. It was a job for him. They paid him, you know, like a regular guy, and that's how he started. And he learned a lot there. That's why he can fix electrical. Anything goes bad, he can fix.
Yeah.
But he's got a lot of memories in there. And Grandpa would walk home from work. I had 3 meals a day: morning, breakfast, noon, and supper.
Yeah.
I was home. And then I had time to. But he would walk to work. The shop had a pickup truck to do their service calls in. Arna would do the service calls, and they had they had 4 guys. Their business grew. It could have grown a lot bigger. But Arno, I don't even know if I should say this, Arno took to drinking. And he was a drunk. He got to be an alcoholic. Don't fool around with liquor. Warning you. It did it to him. He already was drinking when they came here, and Dad kind of knew it, but never thinking it was going to turn into that. So there were about 5 years that Dad had to practice support 2 families.
Sure.
They came because he wouldn't come to work some days, and the days that he was there, after a couple of days he'd have that hangover. He was in the back of the shop there, and Steve could, but he's not going to talk about it because it hurts. So anyway, but somehow we sent him away to Clarinda to get dried out, and he turned out to be. He never touched it again. He turned out a blessing to other alcoholics. They came to him. He was big. The Lord just used him in the AA, the Alcoholic Anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
He spoke. He gave speeches all around. He played the organ wonderful. He was an organist for years, and during his drinking years, two mornings I know of, he didn't show up for services. Thank God we had Esther Johns. We knew her. She was the other organist. She had to be called in the last minute. And his wife went through a lot, and his kids did too.
Now, is that this? Is that still the same building that St. John's Lutheran Church is in now? Is that this? Was that the same building that it was back then?
St. Paul?
Yes. What
No.
did I say? St. John's.
Just St. John's.
Paul,
New.
whatever.
I think.
Yeah,
No.
St. Paul.
We were uptown. We bought this square building. I have a picture of it from the Baptists. We had there was very few Lutherans in this town. The few that were bought there used to be a Stetzel hatchery, and we had made that into a little church, and they outgrew that, and then they bought the Baptist church, and that was only 5 years old when we came here. So straight down on 7th Street on the corner where the Metropolitan, or right catty corner from the Commercial Savings Bank.
Oh, okay.
That new building right there. Commercial Savings Bank.
Yeah.
It's right on 7th Street. It tells the big
Yeah.
clock what time it is.
Yep.
Or the Carroll County State Bank is here and the Commercial Bank is here.
Right.
Okay, that's where our church was.
Oh, really?
And then we inherited that beautiful parsonage across the street, and a minister lived there, big, nice square house, and then another house in back of it.
Wow.
But we outgrew that church.
Sure.
Absolutely. I taught Sunday school, and I never got to sit inside the church. I had to go upstairs and sit
Sure.
because
Wow.
there's no place. It was full.
Wow.
So then we decided, and Grandpa had a big doings in building that church. They were going to build it up on Adams Street, just wedge it in, and no car parking place hardly, just on the street. And Grandpa, he just stuck with. He said, I think we should look ahead, and we should think about how this town is growing, and we're going to
Sure.
need. So we bought 11 acres where we are now.
Right.
11 acres
Right.
was a farm.
Sure.
And, well, how am I going to get to church? Different ones, those old ladies would say, huh? But they always got there. So we got that, and we built a new parsonage, church here, and that's, I think, the prettiest setting in this whole town. For sure, you come outside and you have all this big expanse. Sky is so big overhead, you know.
Right.
And that's how when we worked, we had it paid for to the point where we needed. Then we outgrew that, and so we added on more whole new
Right.
Sunday school thing.
Just recently.
Yeah, a couple of years ago.
I remember that.
Yeah, and you know what? That snowball bush that you and I
I
planted.
remember that.
Yeah, it's so beautiful in the spring. It blooms. It's just loaded with flowers. And here we have this other one that I planted, and then I had you come up there.
I remember that.
Yeah, and it's blooming. I'm gonna take I think I have a picture, but I'm gonna take a picture for sure. But our lawn care, our guy takes care of our lawn. I came there one day and I saw a branch hanging way over there. I said, Ryan, you broke off a branch. Yeah, I know. I backed into it. And he keeps breaking branches off of that. It's kind of tall now. Used to be spread out. So I'm going to get a couple of those green steel posts, small, and I'll put 3 of them
Yeah.
in so he doesn't get close.
Okay.
I want that to branch out.
Yeah, no kidding.
I want to hide all those air conditioners.
conditioners.
And besides, I mentioned that often in quilting. Carl and I, it was just a little thing. The ground was so hard, and we dug, and I watered, and I fertilized, and it's, I think, that big now.
I remember it.
Yeah,
I
on
remember
a Sunday
doing
afternoon.
that. That was
didn't
fun.
It?
I
Wasn't
remember
that fun? Those
We
are some-
should sometime go take a picture when
Yeah, we
I'm home.
should.
We should.
Yeah,
When
you'll
I'm
be
home.
home. It'll be blooming about in April.
End of April.
End of April. Yeah, we'll take a picture.
But you let my parents know or something, and when I talk to them or something, then I can, come home for a weekend or something. I think
Yeah.
we need to go take a picture.
We need to
of
take a
that.
picture. A lot of memories to that. Yep, you
So
and I
true.
went up there. We planned that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when I talk about you up at Quilton, they say, "You mean Carl?" And remember, used to come there. Used to come there because I babysat you.
Yep.
And I always remember the one time I'm telling this. It's kind of cute, and what kids will do, the unexpected things.
Yep.
We sat you on the end, and we're going to have a Oh well, Carl's going to eat with us. Oh, that's nice. You stuck your tongue
Did
out
I
there.
really?
I was so mad at.
Ha.
They said, "Oh, kids, they excuse,"
Ha.
but you didn't want that attention,
Yeah.
And you stuck your tongue out at it,
Well.
But they understood.
Yeah,
kids will
sure,
got all
sure.
that attention, just suddenly, was
Sure.
too much.
Sure. Well,
Yeah,
that was me.
but it was neat though.
Well,
But,
I do think I have what I need here.
okay.